what should somebody with ME expect on a visit to a hospital with something that isn't necessarily directly related to ME?
I mean, I don't know if the collapse and the chest pain are the central part, are secondary to her ME, or whether she's got chest pain from other causes. But if it is, then basically she should be ideally treated by doctors who understand ME, can take an overall look at her conditions, see if it fits in, treat her with respect, belief, and humanity.
Thank you. You got... Yes, Ellen, please.
Well, we've had similar situations in Norway, and what I have done a couple of times now, or more than a couple of times, I've told the patient who rang me, worried, what do I do? I've said, as soon as you get to the hospital, ask them to call me and give me an email address, and then I've mailed the Peckerman article.
Right.
And asked the specialist to read that, and that works. So far, touch wood.
Thank you, Ellen. That's very helpful. I do know that this person has given the Peckerman article to numerous doctors and they've refused to read it. Byron wants to come in on that.
It's pretty easy in most modern hospital emergency situations to evaluate if angina is cardiac. And it would sound to me that it's unlikely that this is cardiac pain. But one of the most common causes is esophageal spasm, which will give severe and death-fearing cardiac-like symptoms. John Shea discussed this as well in the January meeting in Florida, and he attributed at least some of these cases to enteroviral infection in the upper stomach and lower esophageal area. I would suggest that this person, before she has or he has another attack, have esophageal and gastric examination. What happens is, as soon as emergencies find it's not heart, they dismiss the patient, often as psychological, but it can be a real physiological problem.
Thank you.
I'm not going to let you get away with that, Byron, I'm afraid. The mitochondrial failure that I see in my patients is a lot of the problem is in the heart, and I think that's why we see so many cardiac symptoms in people with fatigue syndromes. And this isn't me talking, this is the American cardiologists who have demonstrated that mitochondrial failure is a large part of heart failure and angina and heart disease. And she is getting heart pain. It's because the mitochondria are failing. She's switching to anaerobic metabolism and producing lactic acid. And I would say to her, well, she needs to treat the mitochondrial dysfunction with the package of supplements.
And when she next ends up in hospital, to get them to ring you?
Well, I mean, it's very difficult because, the doctors don't get their heads around those ideas.
What tests should she have then when she goes in to evaluate this?
The mitochondrial function test is the obvious, but they won't do that in the hospital. But there's no doubt she is experiencing heart pain, and it's due to lactic acid in the heart muscle. That's what she's perceiving because she's switching to anaerobic metabolism in the heart.
I just want to add, what Sarah has added, that these patients, they've got with cardiac pain and they've found not to have a heart attack, they will be sent off for a treadmill test, which is obviously going to be very detrimental to their condition. So that's the next thing they have to be aware of.
Yes, listening to all these very interesting theories, I wonder how they all fit together and what you all can agree on and what, if anything, you disagree on.
I think we're all looking at different ends of the elephant, and it's hard to disagree with very much from my point of view, with any of the speakers. We're just looking at totally different areas.
I had a slide which attempted to address that, which it was a graphic slide with cells and viruses and stress and depression, etc. I think that does encompass many, if not most, of the aspects that have been discussed. We've got virus infection, immune responsiveness, things related to the brain inflammation, cytokines, depression, a biological basis for depression. There's a lot in those slides which does fit very well together.
I guess I'd like to comment on some of those things. I think one of the problems with medicine is that so much of medicine is viewed in terms of systems. You know, we talk about the immune system, circulatory system, the central nervous system, the neuroendocrine system. All those things are impacted here. But it seems to me that we need to look at it in terms of why they're impacted. What's the underlying cause? That's what I've been trying to do. With regard to, some of the data that's been presented, it seems to me that much of the data is consistent with the general overview that I discussed, and certainly the neurological, the mitochondrial things are very much consistent with that. The only thing that I've heard that I disagree with in terms of specific interpretation, I think, was Dr. DeMierler's statement that he thought that the mitochondrial dysfunction was a late mechanism, and I don't agree with that. I do think that, as Dr. Myhill said, one of the issues there being the accumulation of mitochondrial DNA mutations is something that's progressive and therefore is late. But all the other things should be early.
Hi, this is for Dr. Kerr and Dr. Peterson and Professor Hooper, because you mentioned genetics, I think. I was just wondering, Professor Hooper mentioned autism, and that led me onto this whole thing. There's a lot of people with, there's a lot of autistic kids getting gene testing in the States, and there's a growing number of people who are trying biomedical treatments for autism in CFS. And there's one particular doctor called Amy Yasko in the States who's looking at the SNPs in the methylation cycle, and that's why I wanted to ask Dr. Kerr if he felt there was any merit in looking at SNPs in that area, or if that was looking in the wrong direction altogether.
There are various ways to look for inherited predisposition to development of chronic fatigue or inherited aspects. I mean, I think at this point focusing on a particular area is premature. That's my opinion. We plan to do that once we've got the final gene signature to look at those genes for inherited variation. Now, with 80 genes, that's a very big job because there may be 100 SNPs within one gene or more. So we need a targeted approach, and those are my ideas, but it's not a very well thought out, rational approach just yet. There are other approaches, and I don't think I can answer your question with a single answer. I'm sorry.
I think I raised autism because there does seem to be some similarities, and there is a big similarity in the. This is one of the illnesses which seems to be one of the conditions. It's not really an illness; it's a condition, which seems to be increasing at a rate that is far larger than earlier identified. Some people think it's just down to diagnosis, but the unit doesn't think that in Sunderland, where I am involved with them. We are looking at SNPs as well. I think what's come out of the autism work would look at the methylation cycles, we'll look at the sulfur cycles particularly, and that's where we are looking at for it in some very preliminary studies. We haven't got started properly yet. We've just validated the methodology. So we haven't got any data in regard to that. The other thing I would say is that autism is a developmental disorder. I think most people seem to agree that, and what's interfering with development is very often the things that are causing ME, things like mercury and heavy metals, pesticides. So we desperately need some kind of studies which to associate, if there is an association between where these increases in these illnesses are taking place, where autism is on the increase. What's interesting about that area? Is it a farming area? Is it an industrial area? I do know that Dick Van Steenis is looking at incinerator plumes and where they're falling on communities and finding increased levels of autism and other illnesses as well, and conditions amongst children and amongst young people. And he's seeing elderly people being affected by those exposures. And so the whole question of chemical exposure in the environment in which we live is a big issue, and it's coming to the boil slowly because the chemical industry, of course, doesn't like this, and they don't want to withdraw their products unnecessarily. But that's all I can say at the moment. But I would be looking at developmental biology and people like Vivian Howard at Liverpool, who's a fetal toxicologist, for some of the answers to these questions.
I have never seen a group of patients with so much pathology, end organ pathology, as the ME patients. You don't have to depend on symptoms.
Stay hopeful, because I think we're moving very rapidly in the right direction. I think the science will bear out, and it won't be that long until we have those biological markers that will tell the doctors that they can't put this in a psychiatric diagnosis, and I think we'll have effective treatments. It's coming very soon.